Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Let's go around and say our names. My name is Jim.
I'm Bob.
Mike.
Justin.
George.
Mark.
Donald.
I'm Burns. Nicholas. Carl. I'm Carl. My name is Jim. I'm 3. Artie. Will. Ed. Good. Jack. David. David. Paul. Peter.
Snake.
Great. We have one new person. Welcome. Donald Rothberg, old friend of this community, long involved in the socially engaged expression of Buddhism. He's a meditation teacher and a writer. And welcome back. Always good to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's good to be here, and feels like the last few times I've come, they must have been around vacations or something, because it feels like a little fuller group this time. It's nice to be here. What I want to talk about is, I think actually, maybe the key question for our practice, or one way to say the key question, which might be a contradiction, I'm not sure. But it's, and this is the question of how do we deepen our daily life practice? How do we take the material of our daily lives as a place for really for spiritual growth? And I want to start with 2 observations. First of all, many of us aspire towards a kind of spiritual life that, certainly in the context of Buddhism, was not common among lay people. That in Asia, definitely if you wanted to reach spiritual heights or depths, depending on your metaphor, you would go to a monastery to become a monk or a nun. And to be a layperson was definitely to stay in the minor leagues. And yet I think that we, for whatever reasons, don't want to be monks. And yet we aspire towards something that's deeper. We really seem to want to find in this culture a new kind of form, or maybe multiple forms, that permit spiritual growth in the midst of everyday life, in the midst of, in the midst of jobs, in the midst of having presidents and attorney generals and so forth, and in the midst of often living alone or living just with 1 or 2 people, and having not as strong a community as we have. So I want to note that many of us have very deep spiritual aspirations, and we don't quite know the forms that let that spiritual life flourish. I think for most of us, it's difficult, and yet we haven't signed up for the monastery. So, second observation is that if we're interested in this sort of having our daily lives be places of spiritual growth, we don't have often a lot of support. Even in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is certainly a center for this kind of exploration, and I think you may have had the same thought, but I moved to this area about 14 years ago after having lived in Kentucky and rural Ohio for 7 years, and I thought surely all my problems would be resolved. And I remember even driving over some of the bridges and just being amazed at the beauty of the bay. And I remember the first time when I went up in the Berkeley Hills, I just said, "Oh my gosh, this is totally awesome." I said, how can anyone possibly be unhappy living in this area? And it didn't take me that long to learn how that might be possible. But it's actually not so easy. I mean, the culture obviously, could be called a culture against mindfulness. In many ways, it's a culture of distraction. It's a culture in which we're really, encouraged. If something bad happens, we're encouraged to go shopping. It's a culture in which community in many of its forms is declining. It's a culture in which, surprisingly, things are getting more and more mental in many ways, I think, with the computer and the internet. It's kind of ironic that there was a sort of a time of opening, probably starting in the 1960s, when there seemed like there'd be a chance to sort of balance out this extreme mind-body split. And then computers and the internet come along, and many people are just zoned into a purely, almost what seems like a purely mental kind of emphasis, whether at work or at home. The Thai monk Buddhadasa, one of the greatest, probably the greatest Thai monk of the 20th century, was once asked what he thought of Western culture. It's kind of reminiscent of, do you remember when Gandhi was asked about what he thought about Western culture, and he said, I think it's a good idea. And Buddhadasa was asked, what do you think of Western culture? And he said, lost in thought. And so we in many ways, we don't have so much support, and yet we aspire towards a deepening of our everyday lives, and of our everyday lives as being a very significant place for spiritual growth. That probably most of us don't spend huge amounts of time on retreat or even in meditation. There may be some exceptions, but so the question is, how do we do it? How do we do this daily life practice? And I want to mention 5 standard answers to that question. Perhaps the most important, and then not talk about those hardly at all. And I want to mention 4 qualities that I've looked when I had to ask myself the question, what's been most helpful for you in terms of daily life practice, that go beyond the ordinary ones or the common ones. Those are the ones I actually want to emphasize and talk about. But I do want to mention ones that you may have heard. Certainly at most Vipassana retreats, there's usually a end of retreat talk that emphasizes these are the factors that are really important for daily life practice, and they really are. And those are items like have a daily practice. Have a daily meditation practice, whether it's a sitting practice or some other practice in the tradition that you're part of. But that's really, really crucial. Have a daily practice that just keeps you coming back. Have a way in which you follow the ethical precepts. They furnish a kind of safety net for our practice. That also is a very clear way that we can apply daily life practice in the midst of our interactions and activities that really work with the ethical precepts, the fundamental ethical precepts in Buddhism being that of being very careful to refrain from harming, from taking what's not given, and to be very careful with the energies of speech and sexuality and intoxication. So the ethical precepts are a second very important area. And I think a third very crucial area that is sometimes not emphasized so much in daily life practice is working with a mentor, having some kind of a teacher or mentor, and sometimes that can be a group. I think that sometimes I've worked with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship base groups, which usually go for 6 months, and some of them have gone for several years. That Paul was a member of a group that we worked together for quite a few, 3 years, I think. And sometimes we found that even the group can be a kind of mentor, that a very close-knit group can serve mentoring functions. But I think it's very crucial to have some kind of mentor or teacher that gives some kind of feedback that one can be in regular relationship with. It's been crucial for me to work with a series of mentors. And the fourth is reading and study that help give more of a framework for understanding. And the fifth that's very crucial, again, that's I think we know, is Sangha, or community, the way that we are tremendously supported when we are with like-minded people, maybe coming here every Sunday and other activities. I know that for myself, I often notice that there's a kind of switch which goes on in my very consciousness when I enter into a spiritual community. It's as if something relaxes. I don't have to worry so much about how people are going to act. And I've noticed that there's something in me that just shifts into, mindfulness. Oh, now I'm here. It's as if being in community and the matching of my deeper aspirations, flips a happiness switch or something inside. There's something that, do you know what I'm talking about? Does something happen when you just walk into community and something just shifts? I don't know what it is. But it's, and so those are five more or less crucial, important aspects of deepening daily life practice. And I want to talk about four others that I think that when I was reflecting are really crucial for me. And I want to do so, and at the end of talking about each of them, I'm going to have either some kind of quote or poem that illustrates each of them. And the first one I take from a poem by the Japanese poet Nanao Sakaki. And I'm going to give a kind of name to each of these four. And the first is called Break the Mirror. Nanao Sakaki had a poem, it's a very short poem, called Break the Mirror. It goes like this. To stay young, to save the world, break the mirror. To stay young, to save the world, break the mirror. And what I'm referring to with that sense of break the mirror is that it's very important for us to sort of shake up our habitual consciousness. That something that which aids tremendously in deepening practice is to periodically break up our usual way of thinking and being. We get in habits. Anyone noticed? We get in habits, and it's very hard to sort of see ourselves sometimes because we just get in a very habitual consciousness. In thinking about this talk, I came across a quote from Kafka. He said, "A good book is like a pickaxe to break the frozen ice of the mind." Not the most Buddhist quotation, but it gets at the point that there's something that we need to find ways that shift consciousness, that take us out of our habits. I think daily practice can do that. Coming into a community regularly can do that. Doing retreats is very crucial. I think that those of us who've done retreats, and particularly longer retreats, one can really get outside one's ordinary mind. That there's a way, I know when I've done long retreats up to a month or two, one of my teachers once used a metaphor. He said, doing a short retreat is like going on a boat away from land. And when you do a long retreat, you go a long way away from land. And you're really kind of out there. And you can really, it actually poses some difficulties for actually returning to one's life sometimes and returning to one's consciousness. But it's a way that one can really see things that one would not ordinarily see. And I think that we need to find ways to do that. Sometimes vacations can do that. I think in other cultures there were all sorts of ways to shift habitual consciousness. I think of Carnival, I think has that function. I know in the Middle Ages there were festivals that the poor would become kings or queens for a day. And they'd actually, I think in some settings, they'd actually be able to make laws. Just like Chris Daly with Willie Brown. I think that probably harkens back to medieval festivals or something, although it was not sanctioned. And so I think there are ways that we do that. I know I had training earlier this year and last year. I enrolled in the Clown School of San Francisco. I don't know if I ever mentioned that in being here, but I enrolled in the Clown School of San Francisco, and that shifted consciousness. Becoming a clown, I would go into training, actually not very far from here, 19th and Shotwell, there's a studio. And I'd go to get clown training, and I'd be a clown in my training for like a few hours a week, and it totally shifted things. I couldn't help but become a clown in very serious settings. It was wonderful, very important. So that's the first notion. You might think of yourself, how can I find ways really to shift consciousness? It may be to not work so much or whatever. So the first aspect is break the mirror. To stay young, to save the world, break the mirror. The second way to really bring practice into daily life is something that, the phrase I take is actually from one of my mentors, my main mentor the last years, John Travis. And John has this phrase which I love. His phrase is, let your body be your monastery. Because I was talking with him, and I was saying, it's so hard in daily life, And, a lot of these great teachers and some of the people he worked with or I've worked with, they live in monasteries, and the support system is pretty good, And what do we do? And he said, in a way, it'd be very nice to have external support, but somehow we have to go towards internalizing so much the intentions and the aspirations, and to do it really almost at the level of one's body and cells. Let your body be your monastery, to me, points to the way that awareness of body is incredibly crucial for us in this culture. And I could talk about that in a number of different ways. And for me, working to have body awareness be very, very present, and much more present than certainly I grew up with, has been crucial to having daily life practice be there, because it kind of keeps me grounded. I go to meetings, and if I can be aware of my body, then I can really be present there. If I'm with friends, and I can be aware of my body. And it's something that's not so easy, that many of us were trained to be very, very mental. I remember when I was, like in my early 20s, and I went to graduate school, and I remember I was actually living in Germany. I was studying in Germany for a year. And there was a path. I was actually studying German language, and I had to walk about a mile or two from a farm where I was living down to the study center, off in a little village in rural Germany. And I remember experiencing my consciousness as if all my consciousness was in my head. And I had no body consciousness. And I thought to myself, gosh, you're really sort of like a mind on a pole. And it wasn't a happy thought, but it was a realization. And this was after after having been an athlete for 10 years. So I was very physically active. It wasn't that I was not physically active, but my consciousness was not in my body. It was in my mind. And anyone who's watched a child go from 3 years old to 16 years old knows that phenomena for most people, not everyone. But it's something that maybe most of us, maybe all of us, went through in some way. And so letting one's body be your monastery really goes against our conditioning. And I know for myself, to do that, I had to do a lot of meditation that was very body-centered, that really brought my awareness back to my body. John had me actually, for the better part of 2 years, whenever I would meditate, just be with my whole body all the time. And I spent, quite a few months of long retreats with the full body as my primary meditation object. And it took that kind of emphasis. I think when we start meditating, we get in touch with our body more through being with the breath and being with sensations. But it seems to take a lot of emphasis to bring that body awareness into our being. Partly, I think what it does is it starts to give us a balance between mind and body that, again, I think is very, very deeply needed for the healing in our culture. For a mental culture, we have to have a way in which this culture and ourselves can have, as it were, our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our spirits accessible all the time. And when we are conditioned to primarily be mental, and you can see that just with people's houses. Go into people's houses, the TV's on, the radio's on. It's like as if I don't have mental stimulation, I don't exist anymore. It's almost like that. And so this work to ground ourselves in our body and to really come more into our body and to have the body mindfulness be a key part of our practice, I think, is very crucial. I wanted to read a poem that I think gets at the sense of body consciousness from Mary Oliver. It's called White Flowers. Last night in the fields, I lay down in the darkness to think about death. But instead I fell asleep. As if in a vast and sloping room filled with those white flowers that open all summer, sticky and untidy in the warm fields. When I woke, the morning light was just slipping in front of the stars, and I was covered with blossoms. I don't know how it happened. I don't know if my body went diving down under the sugary vines in some sleep-sharpened affinity with the depth, or whether that green energy rose like a wave and curled over me, claiming me in its husky arms. I pushed them away, but I didn't rise. Never in my life had I felt so plush, or so slippery, or so resplendently empty. Never in my life had I felt myself so near that porous line where my own body was done with and the roots and the stems and the flowers began. The third aspect of deepening daily life practice that I reflected on is, I would phrase like this: carry out many mindfulness experiments. And what I mean by that is that I think that in our daily lives we have to find ways to bring mindfulness into very ordinary circumstances. We have to find ways to have the quality of attention that we have on the cushion there in the midst of our work, in the midst of our meetings, organizations, and even in the midst of our friendships and relationships. That somehow we have to be, in other words, have to learn how to be fully present. And I wanted to share that lately I've been, every time I do different kinds of teaching. I do some Dharma teaching. I also have a position at Sabre Graduate School here in San Francisco. And we have a lot of meetings, like maybe, 3 full days a month or something. It seems like it's a lot of meetings, maybe 3 or 4. And they're not the greatest experiences usually. And what I've been doing recently is every time I have meetings, they become like retreat days. And I go into these meetings, and somehow I have the motivation to really be as aware as I can, and I bring a sheet of paper that gives me some guidelines. Like a lot, I think I talked about wise speech maybe a year or 2 ago here. And there's some guidelines for wise speech, and I write them down on the sheet of paper. The guidelines are like being truthful, helpful, kind, and having clear intentions. I write these down on the sheet of paper, and I sit there at the meeting, I look at them, and I try to stay in my body, and I take notes about what's happening in the meeting. And, so I would write notes like, aware, very difficult to actually have body presence with a meeting full of ideas, and I sort of reflect on this, and sometimes I notice getting tired, noticing inner sarcastic thoughts. Time for a bathroom break. So, which I have actually found is one of the great important meditative techniques for bringing daily life practice alive. Take a lot of breaks. No one asks questions if you go to the bathroom far more than is necessary. And this is actually a very important technique that no doubt will be highlighted in the Dharma manuals that are written about daily life practice that emerge, 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. Because we have to do this, right? We have to find ways to make this real in daily life, or it doesn't happen. Right? nothing happens. We just sort of have nice times on the cushion or retreats, but the rest of our lives is kind of just as it was. So we have to find these ways and do these experiments and take, it's like sometimes you can take particular challenges of daily life that you kind of know it. Like, okay, when I'm with this person usually triggers me. Make it a mindfulness experiment. Say, whenever I'm with this person, I'm going to try to be mindful. It's like somehow it's actually giving priority to our spiritual lives in the midst of daily life. And that's not easy. It's like, how can I really truly go to a meeting and think the most important thing for me here is not to do this or that or have this or that agenda met, but it's actually to be as present, as wise, and compassionate as I can be. I don't know about you, but for me it's a switch to actually shift my intention like that, to shift my motivation. So often in a lot of these places, what's our main interest? It might be just survival. Right? It might be actually just to actually come out of a situation somewhat intact. Right? Someone having fulfilled some intention. And what happens if we can take some of our times in our lives and actually make them mindfulness experiments? And I don't think there's anything devious about this. I have good friends or family members, and I can go there and actually say, okay, this is a usual trigger that happens. I'm going to watch out for that and be mindful and see how I am with this person. So I think you might think right now, what would be a little experiment that I do with a given person, or maybe in a 2-hour block or a 3-hour block in my work. And I think we have to it's like carving out these liberated territories in our experience and gradually having them be bigger. So I wanted to read, to illustrate this, I think an example of someone doing mindfulness experiments. And some of the difficulties that these are 9 frames from Matt Groening's Life in Hell. And I'll just read them. I think actually nothing changes in terms of the image. The image is, I don't know who's the figure with the 2 large ears, I don't know. But whoever this person is says, starting right now, I will commit to my deepest truth. Next frame. Starting right now, I will remain conscious and mindful. Starting right now, I will stay with myself through all my feelings of pain and suffering. Starting right now, I will live my life with an open, trusting heart. Starting right now, I will forgive everyone, including myself. Starting right now, I will embrace the unknown with wonder and awe. Starting right now, I will honor myself with unflinching honesty. Next frame, some voice comes from outside. Morning coffee break's over. And then the last frame. Starting at lunch, I will surrender myself to the love of the cosmos. So it's actually related to the last one I want to mention is, I would frame it this way. The last sort of aid to deepening daily life practice is practice the alchemist's craft. Practice the alchemist's craft. And what do I mean by the alchemist's craft? It's the alchemist purportedly changed lead into gold. And this is about taking our difficult experiences as starting points for practice. I think this is a very, very crucial aspect of deepening practice. If we can take the moments of distress or difficulty or suffering as wake-up calls to bring all our spiritual resources there, I think our practice can really accelerate if we can do that. It takes a lot of mindfulness. We have to notice that we're in distress, because what happens usually when there's distress or suffering? What usually happens is, as it were, our defense mechanisms kick in immediately. And we just go into automatic pilot, which could mean, when there's distress, it could mean blaming ourselves, blaming others, going to the refrigerator, going for one's escapist route of choice, whatever. And there's something about how do we actually bring a moment of distress and actually bring in the possibility of working with our best wisdom and compassion. There's a beautiful phrase which comes from Tibetan practice, some of you may know from the Lojong practices, which goes like this: transform all obstacles into the path. Transform all obstacles into the path. It's very, very key. Like for myself, it's actually been wonderful to get excited about suffering or distress. I don't know if that may be exaggerating a little bit, but it's actually to be really interested sometimes to lose it a little bit. Or that's probably exaggerating it still. But it's to actually have some interest and not go automatically into the defenses. It's to take, so I find if I just have a guideline now, sometimes I, like you, probably wake up in the middle of the night and think I've done something really awful, or blown something, or does anyone else have that experience? One or two of you. And
Never.
our leader. And so, what I try to do, whenever that happens, I just instantly go into sitting. And I don't think that's repressive. I think it's actually opening to what's there. It's actually, I think, a sign of actually being kind to myself. And I take it as a starting point for practice. And again, it doesn't mean not feeling what's there. But it's really shifted things so that I just now get in the habit when something difficult happens, like sometimes, not too much, but sometimes I think, when I give a Dharma talk, I think I've given a really, really bad talk. And I notice something is with her. At least I think that. Maybe I haven't, but at least I think that. You know how that is? You've done something and you just, I don't. And I've just taken, okay, because usually if we don't practice, it could turn into a 2-hour mood. It could kick into all the self-judging. It could last for 2 hours, 3 days, 2 weeks, right? And so I found if I can just notice that that there's maybe some blaming going on or something, I can just notice it and instantly say, okay, what's there? And it might be just to notice, oh, I'm sad. I didn't give as good a talk as I wanted to. And just in that, how just when you touch that sadness, it's like the way the child can go through the emotions and come out the other end. And it's just in touching very directly those emotions, one can actually not stay there so much. And so it's this great, it's almost like a secret that one can actually go into the difficulties and can transform the difficulties. One can go into what's difficult rather than trying to change the subject. To go into the difficulties can be a way of deepening practice. And we get plenty of opportunities. We get plenty of difficulties in our daily life. Try it with small things. Just like, I don't know, not having the traffic go as fast as you want. Try it with small things. Anyway, I want to close with a poem by Rumi, which talks about this way that going into difficulties can be very central to spiritual practice. This is from a poem by Rumi called The Question. One dervish to another, what was your vision of God's presence? The other dervish, I haven't seen anything. For the sake of conversation, though, I'll tell you a story. That's how Rumi starts this wonderful way. He starts off a lot of his poems. God's presence is there in front of me, a fire on the left, a lovely stream on the right. One group walks towards the fire, into the fire. Another towards the sweet flowing water. No one knows which are blessed and which not. Whoever walks into the fire appears suddenly in the stream. A head goes under on the water surface. That head pokes out of the fire. Most people guard against going into the fire and so end up in it. Those who love the water of pleasure and make it their devotion are cheated with this reversal. The trickery goes further. The voice of the fire tells the truth, saying, I am not fire, I am fountainhead. Come into me and don't mind the sparks. If you are a friend of God, fire is your water. You should wish to have 100,000 sets of moth wings, so you could burn them away, one set a night. Thank you very much. Please.
When you're talking about
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
How can you not do that if you do a breathing type of meditation?
Well, you can. The question would be, what kind of meditations can you transfer to daily life? And some people do work with their breath. You could work with your breath in a similar way, that you could be with your breath at a meeting and have that be a way of grounding. And I think that's fine. I think there's some advantages, not so much to compare them too much, but I think being aware of the whole body seems to be a kind, for me, I'll just talk of my own experience, it seems to be a kind of presence that
it's what the Chinese call qi, isn't it? Just a sense of spirit, or
and they would sometimes we would translate that as energy. It doesn't have to be that energetic, but it's a I don't know. I wouldn't say don't be with the breath. The breath can be a very good way to ground oneself and one's body in daily life. I think sometimes it takes a little more concentration and it's a little more. I don't know. I think it could work. The key is somehow. The key, something I didn't mention, is an ability somehow to have both inner attention and outer attention happening at the same time. And that's not very easy. I don't want to suggest that this is something you can just do. For me, this took quite a bit of training. But it's something about having inner attention and outer attention. It's basically the question, how can you be mindful when there's so much thinking going on if you're like at a meeting? Because if we're just in the thinking, we tend to get caught up in it, right? And it's like, how can you have a larger field of attention, which helps one to sort of not take the thinking as all that's happening. Does this make some sense?
Oh yes.
But it's
the
just like
story of Gandhi's death has been one of the most impressive things ever. I mean, his focus was on his breath. He believed that if at the moment of death he was focusing on the drum or whatever, it would be okay. And sure enough, in the actual eventuality, he has a man shooting him, and he was still saying this.
He was right there. It's like he had almost like a mantra going, or he had a way of being present that was not, in Buddhist language we would say that it was not completely identified with any one part of experience. It's like a broad awareness. That's, I think, what we're cultivating. But it's this ability to have some inner attention and outer attention. I think that's the direction. And again, I don't want to say that that's easy. For many of us, we may be in the direction of that simply when we start coming out of a purely mental way of experiencing.
It seems to be like a pendulum that you almost can't avoid. Even if you're in a happy state, there's something perverse about monkey mind. It wants you to worry or something.
Yeah. A lot of it's about just not being caught up in this sort of mental trance that we live a certain amount of our lives in, and the culture does as well.
In some ways, that mental trance, I know in my case, has served me well in the sense that there's so much stimulation. It's just overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so, I guess, in psychology, they call it dissociation, or whatever you kind of want to put it. So, oftentimes, I know when I have attempted to kind of come back into my body, it's excruciating. I can't handle it. Mm-hmm. It's too much because it's like there's too much sensory, there's too much stuff going on. External, in the world. And so what I'm wondering is there a way as you practice to kind of know, okay, this is the limit? Is there anything first of all, have you experienced that limitation of it being, just too much to handle being in the body? And then at what point do you stop pushing yourself when that's happening?
Yeah. my best response. We might have to, ideally we might have to talk a little bit more to know that we were talking about the same experience.
Okay.
But well, I remember when I was first doing retreats. I would do retreats, and I would go back. I was living in Boston at the time, actually, and I don't know if anyone knows the north end of Boston, but I was living in the Italian section of Boston, and there was a lot of stimulation, and it was pretty intense. And I would come back there, and I would feel like what you're experiencing, like I would be really wide open, and there would just be so much stimulation there. And it would be kind of hard. And I think what happens over time is one develops ways to be with that energy without getting knocked around quite so much. That's certainly been my experience. I think I can be equally open now, and the same thing doesn't happen. And I don't know if I could analyze that so easily, but I think that's the case. And it's in the same way, maybe some of you have had experiences of being on retreat and finding that it's very, very hard to just have a conversation with people after a retreat. People have had that experience sometimes, that the energy just sort of rises to the head, and you can feel very, very almost giddy sometimes. People have that. How many people have had something like that experience? And I've found over time that as my energy is more grounded in my body, that happens less and less. There may be something about what you're reporting which is more comes in a learning stage, and that when the energy is really fully grounded and not so going back and forth between mind and body and stuff, that one can be present with those things without it being so hard. That's my personal experience. Like I say, I don't know. I can't recall having talked a lot about that with other people, but that's my best response now. So I think that it's fully possible to be very, very open, be in one's body, and not be overwhelmed by all the stimuli.
The follow-up to that too is what I anticipate, in this practice is, okay, well, I'm gonna be becoming more aware of what's going on in my body. I'll also be, in a sense, more aware of what's actually happening out there, and what's happening in my relationships with people. So, of course, it means probably there's going to be some change. And I think, to me, that's the other kind of bit of resistance that I have. It's like, well, what happens if I'm changing our relationship? I mean, what's to come? Is this going to create friction? Is this going to create, So I think that's, to me, the component. Where does that courage? How do you find courage to kind of muster that?
If I had to say what the courage is, and this is probably the name of some seminar or other, but I think it's the courage to be yourself. That's what we're talking about. The courage just to be yourself, and because who am I? Am I going to let other people define the situation, or can I just be there, open, with my heart open and my mind open? And yes, that's it's not easy, and we have to go through. I think when we take that route, we actually, it's a kind of a purification process. We actually study very closely all the ways that we're actually acting because we want to, get other people's approval, or not make waves, or all the different ways that we're scared to be ourselves. And I think we study those, and I can certainly see that in my experience. I know as a teacher, for many years, I didn't really want to be fully present. I wouldn't have said that at the time. But I didn't really want to be fully present because I didn't know was safer just to, do certain things that I was comfortable with. And I didn't know what would happen if I just was myself. And it was scary. It was scary to actually be there, fully present. And I took refuge sort of in whatever, a curriculum or doing this or, And so there's this process of being, of coming to being present does take courage. But we also, I think what we also see are all the ways that it's difficult for us to do that. The way, that's why I was urging these experiments, that we can actually go into a situation where you're usually triggered and try to just bring your best mindfulness into that situation. Whether it's with another person or a boss. I had these, I was once chair of our faculty, and I don't know if I've told this story here, but I had to deal with a president who was like this horrible listener, and I would say something. He was like this 6'4", 250-pound guy, got red in the face all the time, yelled at me, just yelled at everyone. I don't know why he was president, but that's another question. And my initial reaction when I get yelled at and not listened to is to kind of think this guy is, off, and to basically judge him and withdraw in moral superiority. It's a common technique. And it was, I took this as a mindfulness experiment, you might say. And I said, I'm going to be present. And it actually took a lot of work to actually see in myself what was happening internally that led me when he would not listen and when he would say something. There was a kind of internal shutdown that was happening for myself that was scarcely conscious, in which I went from, I've said something, he's yelled and indicated that he's not listened at all, and there's something in me which almost repeats a childhood pattern of I'm not listened to, oh, this is bad, let's get out of here. And I had to be able to watch internally for the stimulus by which I went from taking what he said to withdrawing. And I was able to take what used to be an automatic process and break it down and actually observe and see that it was actually a number of steps. And it was actually possible to say, oh, he didn't listen to me. I'm not going to withdraw. I'm going to just be here. And it took some help from others to find ways to actually stay in the situation. And rather than withdraw, I could notice, oh, I'm feeling pain. He didn't listen to me. Oh, and that's mindfulness. And that's actually breaking what's usually a solid automatic pattern, which we do all the time, into a pattern which we can actually see the steps on. And I can say, oh, it's basically partly to see the pain, which automatically is beneath the threshold of consciousness and takes us into automatic behavior. That's what a lot of our lives are about, right? Unacknowledged pain that leads us to automatic behavior which we're trying to protect ourselves in some way. And to be able in these instances to actually feel the pain makes it possible then to not go into the automatic behavior. And then I could say something like, I'm not sure you've heard my point, but it's important to me and I'm going to keep on making it. And I could say that to him. And so it was very important to have a way of interacting that was not aggressive and blaming, but as it were stood my ground. And so doing that kind of mindfulness, I called it a mindfulness experiment, because I would go there every month. I had to kind of go through the same thing, and I would say, okay, Donald, you love retreats so much and you love practice so much. Here you have a day of meetings. This is your day of retreat. And I would meditate in the morning. I'd clarify my intention. I'd go on BART. I'd do walking meditation. In BART, I'd do loving-kindness meditation with the other people on BART. I'd get off BART. I'd do walking meditation all the way from, about the 15-minute walk to get to where we were. And I felt a little bit like a warrior sometimes. Like, okay, I'm going in. And I really, sometimes after I got familiar with this pattern, I said, it's almost like maybe like an Aikido warrior. I hope he really yells at me today. And then I can try out my abilities.
My new blade.
And I think we find the counterpart of that. And that's, it's like taking what's difficult and making it into practice. And it's not easy, but it really helps if you can compare notes with other people.
One more, David. You had a question.
Oh, yeah. I guess a comment and a question about I think just the efficacy of watching your breath as putting your attention into the whole area of your trunk, which is really where all of the information about your emotional state is. And in the sutras on watching the breath, the Buddha says, you notice I'm taking a short breath, I'm taking a long breath. Well, those are, a way of saying I'm noticing I'm agitated, I'm noticing that I'm calm and relaxed. And so you just, when you're present with this whole area of the body, your limbs are important too, but this is where the readout of your entire energy system is.
Well, that's beautiful, David. Do you find that you can do that in daily life and use that as a kind of like a mindfulness aid?
Oh yeah, that's when I do breath meditation. It's to just allow the breath to talk to me, and not really do a full out breath. It's not a hold to the in breath. And see if the body's going to breathe in and out. And it just suddenly I got a lot of information of fear.
And so do you sort of naturally, when there's some agitation, do you just kind of automatically go back to the breath?
Well, usually we go, I didn't even know I was going to,
Yeah.
My breath tells me.
So it's there.
Yeah.
It's there. That's great.
It reminds me to return. It has its place.
That's great. Yeah, I think that we could compare notes about what helps us in daily life and assemble a book together. Because I think that we need that. We need kind of all these tools to how to, what works for you. How do you use the breath? How do you use the breath in difficult encounters or whatever? So I could keep going, and probably we could too, but we have our finishing cut.
We should. And I just want to throw in two of the most impressive mindfulness inventions ever. An old friend who's been HIV positive since the 70s that they know because of that hepatitis test. For him, every doorway is a memory. He remembers that all is well. Every door he moves through, he remembers that all is well. And he is still alive and well. And another friend, every time she boots up her computer or is slow, any computer delay, she prays. It's a global solution to high technology. She has her list of people that's on her prayer list, and as soon as she's delayed, she moves right into a prayer stance.
It's like Thich Nhat Hanh says, every time you stop at a red light, don't get agitated, but take it as a moment of mindfulness.
We should start a list.
There's
announcements. Our host, the Peerless Jack.
Well, I think everybody but you know the drill, which is there's tea and coffee cake afterwards. There's also a Donna bowl out there. Please contribute. We suggest $5 more or less as you're able. There's a sign-up sheet for the email list to get on the newsletter. And sometimes people go out for lunch afterwards, congregate out there after the conversation period. Oh, yes, and there's, wash your teacups, clean up afterwards. And there's Thanksgiving potluck at Marty Cole's and Thanksgiving.
I have flyers.
That's Marty.
One.
And the ones I've been to have been great.
Easy parking.
Thanksgiving. That's important. For me, it's great. It's Thanksgiving and all the trimmings without the family relationship.
David.
And on that note,
Donald, you have a whole array.
I brought a bunch of stuff. I brought some Buddhist Peace Fellowship literature, some of the journals, and I'll leave them up here. I have to ask $5 for them, but there's a little envelope here. And the newest issue is on freedom and confinement, and the last issue was on Black Dharma, which has some really African Americans and Buddhism, has some really great stuff there. And then I also brought some literature from Spirit Rock. I don't know if you have that literature easily available, but there's both the issue of inquiring mind and the schedule, and those you can just take. And then lastly, I brought in 2 flyers. I'm doing a day-long study retreat on socially engaged Buddhism for the Sati Center at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City. And I brought some flyers on that. It's going to be mostly oriented towards understanding historically the tradition going back, many thousands of years. And there's a flyer that gives a description here, and the cost is just by donation. So it's
And when?
It's Saturday, this coming Saturday from 9 to 5 in Redwood City, and I really look forward to it. And if you are interested, people ask for pre-registration. And then I also, I should announce, I was invited to be the speaker at Sylvia Borstein's class at Spirit Rock, which meets on Wednesday morning, where I've gone a lot, and David goes quite regularly. And I'm basically, if you have Wednesday mornings free, I'm essentially will be the Dharma teacher there from November through the end of January, if you want to come sometime. And it's a very beautiful community, and if you have an unusual, it's from 9 to 11. 9 to 11, and sitting at 9, and the talk's usually about 10 or so. And if you're interested, I have a handout with my own teaching schedule for the next month or two, which is right up here. You could just take.
Carl.
Yeah, speaking of Spirit Rock retreats, in February, the last weekend in February, Eric Colvin and Arena Wiseman are doing a 2-day non-residential retreat at Spirit Rock. They're wonderful lesbian and gay men meditation teachers, and that's from 9:30 to 5 on a Saturday and a Sunday. And if anyone wants to go to a residential retreat there with the same teachers, April 6th to 11th is a 5-night retreat. Some of us have been there before. It's quite an incredible experience. It's LGBT community with the lesbian and gay man as the teachers, and it's a 5-night silent retreat at Spirit Rock, which is a beautiful spot, great facilities, and anyway, so just put that in the back of your minds.
I'm also, I've just been kind of talking to a few people about the possibility of having a discussion in the Sangha about practice and program for the Sangha, making sure that we're serving the needs of the people, getting the kinds of speakers and so forth that people want to have. So if there's an open discussion, it might be a good time. Next week, talk about how they'd like to see it.
Jim.
I just want to make the announcement for anyone who might be interested in a very physical-based meditation practice. I'm working on pulling it together, and so I don't have a flyer quite yet. But for the winter solstice, the last couple of years I've been doing 108 sun salutes. And my teacher is going to be sitting, I think at Green Gulch this winter, so I think I'm going to organize it. So if anyone's interested in trying, we do it in a very mellow way. Come talk to me about it. And I'm working on finding a place in the East Bay on December 22nd to do 108 sun salutes. Bring the spring back.
Okay. Thank you, George, for the recording and your wonderful job hosting the web discussion group. And thank you, Donald, again for such a well-rounded, helpful piece. Let's stand and hold hands. Can you give us a prayer?
Yes. So first, letting be present what might have touched one in either traveling here or in one sitting or in the talk or discussion, and letting that be present to oneself. And be seeing if there are any intentions that may have come to you about deepening your daily life practice.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.